The city skyline shimmered with evening lights, a blend of ambition and illusion. In the heart of the city, towering glass facades reflected wealth and power, a world Anya Williams had only ever glimpsed from the margins. She was the black maid in one of the city's most prestigious families, the Kingsleys, a name synonymous with luxury, influence, and untouchable social standing. Every morning she walked the polished marble floors of their mansion, cleaning, organizing, anticipating needs, and always invisible. To the Kingsleys, she was a fixture, a shadow that served but never belonged. Anya's life had been one of quiet resilience. She took pride in her work, her discipline, and her unwavering commitment to dignity, even when treated as less than human. But beneath her composure was a mind sharp as a blade, constantly observing, analyzing, and storing knowledge. Every conversation, every business call she overheard while dusting the lavish study, every subtle tension between family members, she absorbed it all. Her world was confined to the glittering walls of luxury, yet her spirit was untethered, sensing the fragility behind the opulence. Then came the day that shattered everything. It began with a subtle accusation, a missing document, a misplaced ledger, a small but damning piece of evidence. The Kingsleys, with their calculated cruelty, framed her for embezzlement, a crime she didn't commit. The accusation spread quickly, fueled by social media whispers and private messages within the city's elite circles. Overnight, Anya went from invisible servant to public villain, her name dragged through mud, her dignity stripped away. The irony was brutal. She had spent years safeguarding their secrets, maintaining their empire's illusion of perfection, and now that very empire condemned her? Police arrived at the mansion while the family watched, masks of shocked innocence perfectly in place. Anya was handcuffed, paraded through the streets, and humiliated under the watchful eyes of neighbors and media. Each click of the camera, each whispered judgment reinforced the powerlessness she felt in that moment. Yet within her chest a fire ignited, a quiet, unyielding promise that she would not remain a victim. The Kingsleys had made one critical error, underestimating her patience, intelligence, and resolve. Even in the harsh fluorescent lights of the interrogation room, as officers read her rights and the words fraud and embezzlement echoed around her, her mind was already constructing a map. Every loophole, every vulnerability in the Kingsleys' operations, every overconfident move she had observed while serving them became a piece of her mental puzzle. She was acutely aware that her survival and revenge would not be sudden. It would be methodical, cold, and relentless. The world thought her broken, but in reality, she was beginning the first moves of a meticulous game that would eventually consume those who had wronged her. Prison was a stark contrast to the plush floors and opulent interiors she had maintained. The cold metal bars and echoing hallways reminded her of fragility and vulnerability, but also clarity. Anya had time to think, to strategize, to transform anger into action. She observed patterns, learned how systems operated from the inside, and began forming alliances with people who could help her understand wealth, power, and leverage. Every interaction, from guards to fellow inmates with hidden expertise, added pieces to her mental blueprint. Her nights were restless, haunted by memories of humiliation, the betrayal of people who had once smiled in her face, and the weight of injustice. But she transformed suffering into fuel. She wrote meticulously, documenting vulnerabilities she remembered in the Kingsleys' empire, their finances, their secret deals, their weaknesses, and the overconfidence that made them blind to the threats she could become. Patience became her ally. She understood that revenge was not about impulsive retaliation, but calculated dismantling. Every pawn, every investment, every subtle move she would make in the future was being rehearsed in the prison of her mind. Letters she wrote to herself, coded notes, and mental exercises became her training ground. She learned about stock acquisitions, corporate loopholes, asset management, and how the wealthy could be undone not with violence, but with strategy, timing, and precision. Every injustice suffered was logged and converted into potential leverage. Anya realized that the world's most powerful individuals often underestimated those they considered insignificant. That underestimation would become her greatest weapon. When she finally walked out of prison, the city had not changed, but Anya had. The maid they had thought broken had transformed into a strategist, a silent architect of vengeance. She moved with purpose, anonymity, and discretion. The first step was subtle, opening bank accounts, making small investments, and quietly positioning herself to acquire minor stakes in businesses she knew the Kingsleys controlled. Every move was hidden, calculated, and designed to go unnoticed. The irony was exquisite. The people who had framed her for their dirty secrets remained oblivious, convinced that the past had buried her. But Anya had learned that revenge was not in the spectacle of confrontation, but in the silent, deliberate reclaiming of power. Every deal she executed, every asset she acquired, and every influence she garnered brought her closer to the day she would stand not as a victim, but as the undisputed owner of everything the Kingsleys had once considered untouchable. Her mind often wandered to the moments of humiliation, but she controlled the emotions, converting them into strategic clarity. Every betrayal became a map, every injustice a blueprint. She understood the patience required for her journey. This was a chess game that spanned months, years even, and every move had to be precise. And through it all, she maintained a public invisibility, a ghost in the corridors of power, quietly orchestrating the empire's slow unraveling from within. The first chapter of her journey had ended not with a dramatic confrontation, but with poise, patience, and planning. The Kingsleys believed their luxury empire was secure, untouched by the black maid they had once scorned. Little did they know that every day, every silent transaction, and every hidden maneuver was bringing her closer to the ultimate victory, a day when the power would shift and the person they had tried to destroy would rise to claim not only justice, but total dominion over the very empire they thought untouchable. The city's skyline at dawn looked deceptively serene, bathed in hues of pink and gold, but beneath the calm exterior, a storm of calculated plans was brewing. Anya Williams had stepped out of the shadows of prison into a world that remained oblivious to the silent force growing in its midst. The world had assumed she would crumble, that her ambitions would die with her reputation, but she had emerged sharper, wiser, and more determined than ever. The first steps of her revenge would be subtle, invisible, and meticulous, like water slowly eroding stone. Her small rented apartment overlooked the bustling financial district, a vantage point from which she could study the pulse of the city, its players, and the intricate web of influence that the Kingsleys had woven over decades. Anya had memorized every detail of the empire, the companies, the subsidiaries, the key players, and the hidden debts that even insiders considered untouchable. She spent hours each day analyzing financial statements, reading market reports, and mapping out vulnerabilities. Every observation added another layer to her mental blueprint, a blueprint that would soon shift power from the opulent hands that had framed her into her own. The first strategic maneuver was precision itself. Anya opened multiple anonymous accounts and acquired small, seemingly insignificant shares in the Kingsleys' companies. Each acquisition was calculated to fly under the radar, unnoticed by auditors and board members. She leveraged shell corporations, offshore accounts, and discrete legal entities to mask her moves. The beauty of the strategy lay in its invisibility. While the Kingsleys celebrated their luxurious brunches and gala events, Anya's influence quietly grew, unnoticed, like a shadow creeping across the empire's foundation. Every evening, she revisited the mansion she had once served, not as a maid, but as a ghost of knowledge and memory. The lavish halls, the ornate furniture, the art adorning the walls, all were reminders of the world that had scorned her. She recalled the faces of those who had mocked her, the whispered conspiracies, the false accusations, and the cruel satisfaction they had taken in her downfall. These memories were not fuel for anger, but instruments of clarity. They highlighted the weaknesses she would exploit, the arrogance she would dismantle, and the patience she would exercise in building the empire anew under her control. Anya's evenings were punctuated by meetings with mentors she had carefully chosen during her post-prison reintegration. These individuals, experts in law, finance, and strategic management, became guides in her meticulous education. They taught her not only the mechanics of business acquisition and corporate governance, but also the subtleties of social influence, psychological leverage, and the art of remaining unseen while orchestrating massive change. Every lesson, every insight, every nuanced strategy added to her arsenal, fortifying her mind for the monumental task ahead. The weeks that followed were a blur of calculated patience and strategic action. Anya moved like a chess master, placing pieces across the board while remaining invisible to those who believed they still controlled the game. Small acquisitions multiplied, stakes increased, and influence grew without attracting attention. Each company she quietly integrated into her portfolio strengthened her future leverage against the Kingsleys, whose focus remained on their immediate indulgences rather than the creeping presence of a woman they had dismissed. In parallel, Anya worked to build her personal network of allies. These were not casual acquaintances, but individuals who shared her vision of justice and understood the mechanisms of influence and power. Accountants, attorneys, lobbyists, and former insiders became part of her silent coalition, each providing key insights or assistance that amplified her reach. Through them, she began subtly influencing decisions within the Kingsley sphere, encouraging small mistakes, redirecting investments, and seeding doubts among their partners. Each move was carefully timed, measured, and executed with precision, ensuring that her influence spread like a carefully controlled ripple, never revealing the force behind it. The first real victory came with the acquisition of a minor but symbolically important asset, a boutique investment firm that had long been under the Kingsleys' control. Anya's discreet maneuvering allowed her to secure a controlling interest through layered legal structures, board alliances, and strategic market timing. The Kingsleys remained oblivious, assuming the transition was routine corporate reshuffling. But for Anya, it was a milestone. The first tangible piece of the empire had been claimed. She allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction, reflecting on the poetic justice of the acquisition. The empire that had stripped her of everything had begun to bend beneath her strategy. While the legal and financial battles were unfolding in the shadows, Anya also cultivated her personal persona. She remained understated, careful not to draw attention, while selectively building credibility in investment circles, philanthropic endeavors, and elite social networks. Each move strengthened her position, ensuring that when the time came for the ultimate reveal, she would not only control the empire, but also command respect and influence that extended far beyond its previous boundaries. At night, alone in her apartment, Anya reviewed every decision, every transaction, and every potential threat. She imagined the faces of the Kingsleys as their influence waned, their assets subtly shifting into her control, and their empire slowly fracturing. The thrill was not in vengeance alone, it was in the mastery of the process, the precision of the plan, and the inevitability of the outcome. She often whispered to herself, a quiet mantra of focus and resolve. Patience is power, strategy is justice, and one day they will see that the maid they scorned is the architect of their undoing. By the end of the first quarter of her strategic campaign, Anya had achieved what few could imagine. Her influence was embedded in the very structures that had once been her chains. The Kingsleys continued to operate with confidence, unaware that the seeds of their downfall were already sprouting in every boardroom, investment portfolio, and subsidiary under their name. Anya's patience remained her greatest weapon. Every day, every decision, every calculated risk strengthened the foundation of the empire she was building, one that would soon rise not from force, but from careful, relentless strategy. The stage was set for the next phase of her campaign: higher stakes, bolder moves, and the gradual dismantling of the Kingsleys' public image. She would maintain the delicate balance of invisibility while expanding her power, ensuring that each acquisition, each influence, and each maneuver brought her closer to the ultimate goal: complete dominion over the empire that had once sought to destroy her. The city was alive with its usual rhythm, the distant hum of traffic, flashing neon signs, and the murmurs of people unaware of the invisible chess game unfolding in the shadows. Anya Williams, now operating not as a servant but as a meticulous strategist, had completed her initial phase of quiet infiltration. The minor acquisitions, the anonymous investments, and the subtle networking had begun to yield results. Yet she understood that patience alone was not enough. The first signs of confrontation were inevitable. The Kingsleys had started noticing discrepancies, minor anomalies in board reports, and slight shifts in investment patterns. Anya sat in her discreet office overlooking the financial district, her laptop open, spreadsheets and documents neatly organized, every figure cross-referenced. Her mind moved like lightning, calculating, anticipating, predicting responses. She had always known that the wealthy rarely feared those they considered beneath them, and that hubris would become her ally. Every misstep they made, every careless assumption would become a building block for her silent empire. She reviewed her latest moves, acquiring additional shares in the Kingsley subsidiary companies, subtly influencing decisions through legal proxies, and positioning herself to gain control over minor but strategically important assets. The first sign of recognition came in the form of a board meeting email flagged by her covert insiders. The Kingsleys were discussing unusual discrepancies, speculating on irregularities that seemed impossible to trace. Anya allowed herself a quiet smile. She knew the panic in their voices was building, even though they had yet to identify the invisible hand reshaping their empire. This was the first taste of psychological victory, a subtle acknowledgement that the game had begun, that the first pawns were moving, and that she was already several moves ahead. At night, Anya walked the familiar streets of the city, reflecting on the duality of her life. She moved invisibly among the elite, attending networking events and dinners where her presence went unnoticed, all while orchestrating power moves that would eventually shift the balance of wealth and influence. Her understanding of human behavior became as crucial as her financial acumen. The Kingsleys were predictable in their arrogance. Their decisions were guided by ego, greed, and the assumption that no one could challenge their dominance. Anya exploited these traits, planting seeds of doubt, creating subtle shifts in alliances, and ensuring that each move she made strengthened her unseen grip on the empire. She often revisited memories of her framing, the humiliation and the betrayal, not to indulge in bitterness, but to extract strategic lessons. Every cruel comment, every sneer, every false accusation became a reminder of the stakes and the precision required for the next moves. Her mind, once occupied with survival, was now focused entirely on control and dismantling. Every victory would be silent but complete, executed with the patience of someone who understood that revenge was not a moment, it was a carefully constructed empire. The confrontation manifested subtly but powerfully. A senior accountant from one of the Kingsley's firms noticed a discrepancy, a share that had shifted ownership, a transaction that seemed minor but indicated control over decision-making. The family convened an emergency board meeting, their voices rising with suspicion and panic. They could sense that someone was manipulating their empire, but the threads were invisible, the architect unknown. Anya monitored the meeting remotely through her discreet insider network. She felt a rush of calculated triumph as the Kingsleys debated, speculated, and attempted to locate the source of the disruption. Their frustration was evident, their sense of invincibility shaken. Anya had anticipated this reaction. She had prepared contingency plans for every possible move they could make, ensuring that even if they launched investigations, her identity would remain obscured. The chessboard was set, and she was several moves ahead, a silent puppeteer pulling strings from the shadows. Meanwhile, Anya intensified her efforts. She established additional shell companies, discreetly increasing her influence in subsidiaries, subtly redirecting partnerships, and strategically positioning allies in key advisory roles. Each move was designed not only to strengthen her control, but also to sow further doubt and division within the Kingsleys' inner circle. The family's attention was divided, their focus fragmented, and their confidence eroded. They were still unaware that the maid they had framed, humiliated, and dismissed was now the invisible force dismantling their empire. The psychological aspect of her strategy became increasingly significant. Anya understood that wealth and influence were as much about perception as tangible assets. She carefully leaked subtle information to trusted intermediaries, creating the impression of instability without revealing her hand. Board members grew wary of each other, questioning loyalty and judgment, while Anya's position became stronger. Her mastery of both financial systems and human behavior allowed her to manipulate outcomes without ever stepping into the spotlight. By the end of this phase, the first major confrontation had been resolved in her favor, silently and completely. The Kingsleys remained unaware of the true architect of the disruptions. Anya had not only protected herself from suspicion, but also expanded her influence significantly. The empire was slowly bending under her quiet authority, and her patience was yielding results that brute force could never achieve. At night, Anya allowed herself brief reflection. She remembered the fear, humiliation, and injustice she had endured, but now these emotions were tempered with satisfaction, focus, and purpose. She whispered to herself, a mantra of resolve and cunning. They thought they had the power. They thought I was broken, but I am neither powerless nor broken. I am the architect of everything they cannot see coming. The stage was set for even bolder maneuvers. The first cracks in the Kingsleys' armor had appeared. Alliances within the empire were shifting subtly but significantly. The maid they had scorned was no longer a background figure. She was a silent force, reshaping the empire piece by piece, preparing for the ultimate reveal, a takeover that would be total, inevitable, and irrevocable. Anya's journey was far from over. This was only the beginning of a meticulously planned campaign, one that would require intelligence, patience, cunning, and an unwavering focus on the ultimate goal, the complete dismantling of the Kingsleys' empire and the rise of the woman they had tried to destroy. Every step she took now, every asset she acquired, every influence she leveraged, brought her closer to the day when her empire building would culminate in a moment of silent, indisputable triumph. The city was alive with tension, though few could perceive it. To the casual observer, the Kingsleys' empire remained intact, glittering under the same golden chandeliers, hosting the same lavish parties, and projecting the same aura of untouchable luxury. Yet behind closed doors, the family's veneer of invincibility was beginning to fracture. Subtle shifts in board decisions, unexplained delays, and minor but significant financial anomalies hinted that something or someone was eroding their power from within. Anya Williams observed all of this from a distance, her sharp mind cataloging every reaction, every misstep, and every sign of vulnerability. The quiet strategist had entered the critical phase of her plan, the systematic dismantling of the Kingsleys' influence. She had moved beyond minor acquisitions and low-profile manipulations. Now her objective was to infiltrate key decision-making processes, subtly redirect alliances, and ensure that her control expanded without detection. Each move required precision, foresight, and a mastery of human psychology. Her apartment, modest yet strategically located, became the command center of this silent war. Multiple screens displayed stock fluctuations, board meeting agendas, internal memos, and corporate filings. Through proxies and covert networks, she kept track of every facet of the empire, anticipating reactions before they occurred. Anya understood the power of timing. A misstep could alert the Kingsleys to her presence. Perfect timing could accelerate her influence while keeping her identity hidden. The first stage involved destabilizing key subsidiaries that were heavily reliant on the Kingsleys' personal oversight. She orchestrated subtle shifts in leadership through carefully placed allies and controlled information leaks. These changes created minor internal tensions, forcing the family to divert attention from their core operations. Anya did not act openly. Instead, she let the dominoes fall naturally, using the family's arrogance and overconfidence against them. She had learned that true power lay not in confrontation, but in manipulation and strategy. In addition to internal corporate maneuvers, Anya expanded her financial reach. She quietly acquired more shares, positioning herself as a stakeholder with influence across multiple divisions. These were not mere acquisitions, they were strategic placements designed to give her leverage during board votes, shareholder meetings, and internal disputes. The Kingsleys, preoccupied with maintaining appearances, remained oblivious to the rising force that now controlled key aspects of their empire. Psychological strategy became a central tool in Anya's campaign. She orchestrated rumors of instability within certain departments, subtly questioning the competence of high-ranking executives and seeding distrust among partners. These tactics, executed through intermediaries, created an atmosphere of uncertainty. Minor conflicts within the Kingsleys' inner circle began to emerge, with executives second-guessing decisions, questioning loyalty, and inadvertently undermining each other. The family was reacting to symptoms without seeing the source, Anya's invisible hand guiding the chaos with meticulous precision. Her patience, once a necessity, now became a weapon. Anya understood that an overt move could provoke defensive countermeasures. Instead, she allowed the Kingsleys' own hubris and impulsiveness to accelerate her progress. One particular subsidiary, long considered unshakable, experienced unexpected financial instability after Anya subtly influenced a crucial partnership negotiation. The Kingsleys scrambled to mitigate the situation, unaware that the true architect of the disruption was a woman they had publicly humiliated, a maid they had dismissed as powerless. Even as her influence expanded, Anya maintained discretion in her personal life. Publicly, she remained unremarkable, attending modest events and interacting with elite circles only when necessary. Privately, she coordinated with advisors, analyzed data, and refined strategies for the next phase. Her mental map of the empire grew increasingly intricate, each thread representing a subtle influence, a potential acquisition, or a critical ally. The Kingsleys were like an old, luxurious mansion slowly being hollowed out from the inside, structurally intact to the eye, yet gradually weakened by unseen forces. By the end of this phase, Anya had achieved remarkable results. Key departments had shifted under her indirect control, certain executives were now aligned with her agenda, and multiple subsidiaries were strategically positioned to give her leverage over the empire's core assets. The Kingsleys remained confident, their opulent lifestyle uninterrupted, yet the foundation of their empire was quietly eroding. The true victory lay not in confrontation, but in the silent, invisible accumulation of power that would eventually leave the family powerless. Anya often reflected on her journey during these nights, a mixture of strategic analysis and personal vindication. Each step had required patience, intelligence, and meticulous planning. The Kingsleys' downfall was not just a personal revenge, it was a demonstration of the power of intellect, discipline, and timing. She whispered to herself, reaffirming her purpose. They underestimated me, dismissed me, and framed me. Now I will reclaim everything, piece by piece, until their empire bows silently under my design. As Part 4 concluded, the stage was set for the most daring maneuvers yet. The foundations had been quietly undermined, key players subtly controlled, and psychological pressure mounting within the Kingsleys' inner circle. Anya's empire building was approaching a pivotal moment, one where strategic boldness would accelerate her takeover while leaving her identity shielded from the very family she intended to dominate. The quiet, relentless, and calculated dismantling of the Kingsleys' empire had begun to resemble a symphony of precision, patience, and inevitable power. The city skyline glimmered like a jeweled battlefield, a visual reminder of the stakes at play. For most, it was simply another evening of luxury and commerce, but for Anya Williams, every light represented an opportunity, every shadow a potential advantage. The empire she had begun to dismantle was now teetering under subtle pressure points, and the Kingsleys were finally feeling the first pangs of unease. Anya's strategy had shifted from quiet infiltration to calculated acceleration. Her control over key subsidiaries, executives, and financial levers allowed her to begin orchestrating high-impact moves that would expose the family's vulnerabilities more overtly while still maintaining the mask of invisibility. She began with precise manipulations of high-value assets. Using her covertly acquired stakes, she influenced board votes, subtly redirecting company priorities to align with her emerging agenda. Each minor decision made by the Kingsleys' executives now carried the weight of her influence, though they remained unaware of her presence. The thrill of control, invisible yet absolute, was intoxicating. Anya had become a master of indirect power, understanding that the perception of stability was just as important as the reality. Meanwhile, the Kingsleys' sense of security began to erode. Small financial inconsistencies, missed opportunities, and unexpected delays accumulated, creating a psychological tension that rippled through the family. They called emergency meetings, demanded explanations, and attempted to trace the origins of the disruptions, but each lead only deepened the confusion. Anya observed their desperation with a mix of satisfaction and cold calculation. The family that had once humiliated her now struggled to maintain the facade of control she had long predicted would crumble. Anya also began to assert influence in external business alliances. Through discreet channels and carefully cultivated contacts, she guided partners, investors, and stakeholders to make decisions that inadvertently strengthened her position. Every move was subtle yet decisive, a demonstration of strategic patience combined with opportunistic execution. The Kingsleys remained oblivious, convinced that the instability was a result of chance, mismanagement, or internal conflict, never imagining that a single orchestrator was silently controlling the outcome. Psychological strategy became a central tool in Anya's campaign. She orchestrated rumors of instability within certain departments, subtly questioning the competence of high-ranking executives and seeding distrust among partners. These tactics, executed through intermediaries, created an atmosphere of uncertainty. Minor conflicts within the Kingsleys' inner circle began to emerge, with executives second-guessing decisions, questioning loyalty, and inadvertently undermining each other. The family was reacting to symptoms without seeing the source, Anya's invisible hand guiding the chaos with meticulous precision. Her patience, once a necessity, now became a weapon. Anya understood that an overt move could provoke defensive countermeasures. Instead, she allowed the Kingsleys' own hubris and impulsiveness to accelerate her progress. One particular subsidiary, long considered unshakable, experienced unexpected financial instability after Anya subtly influenced a crucial partnership negotiation. The Kingsleys scrambled to mitigate the situation, unaware that the true architect of the disruption was a woman they had publicly humiliated, a maid they had dismissed as powerless. Even as her influence expanded, Anya maintained discretion in her personal life. Publicly, she remained unremarkable, attending modest events and interacting with elite circles only when necessary. Privately, she coordinated with advisors, analyzed data, and refined strategies for the next phase. Her mental map of the empire grew increasingly intricate, each thread representing a subtle influence, a potential acquisition, or a critical ally. The Kingsleys were like an old, luxurious mansion slowly being hollowed out from the inside, structurally intact to the eye, yet gradually weakened by unseen forces. By the end of this phase, Anya had achieved remarkable results. Key departments had shifted under her indirect control, certain executives were now aligned with her agenda, and multiple subsidiaries were strategically positioned to give her leverage over the empire's core assets. The Kingsleys remained confident, their opulent lifestyle uninterrupted, yet the foundation of their empire was quietly eroding. The true victory lay not in confrontation, but in the silent, invisible accumulation of power that would eventually leave the family powerless. Anya often reflected on her journey during these nights, a mixture of strategic analysis and personal vindication. Each step had required patience, intelligence, and meticulous planning. The Kingsleys' downfall was not just a personal revenge, it was a demonstration of the power of intellect, discipline, and timing. She whispered to herself, reaffirming her purpose. They underestimated me, dismissed me, and framed me. Now I will reclaim everything, piece by piece, until their empire bows silently under my design. As Part 4 concluded, the stage was set for the most daring maneuvers yet. The foundations had been quietly undermined, key players subtly controlled, and psychological pressure mounting within the Kingsleys' inner circle. Anya's empire building was approaching a pivotal moment, one where strategic boldness would accelerate her takeover while leaving her identity shielded from the very family she intended to dominate. The quiet, relentless, and calculated dismantling of the Kingsleys' empire had begun to resemble a symphony of precision, patience, and inevitable power. The sun rose over the city with a sense of deceptive calm, yet inside the glittering offices of the Kingsleys' empire, tension crackled like electricity. The family, once untouchable, now moved with hesitancy, their confidence eroded by weeks of subtle disruption, strategic manipulations, and psychological pressure they could not trace. Anya Williams had orchestrated every step meticulously. Every acquisition, every proxy, every whispered rumor had been a calculated move on the chessboard of power. Now she stood at the threshold of final conquest, the moment when all her patience, intelligence, and strategy would culminate in complete control. From her discreet command center, Anya reviewed her progress. Key subsidiaries were aligned under her influence, shareholder alliances shifted in her favor, and executives unknowingly followed the path she had laid. Even minor departments, previously overlooked, now operated according to her design. The Kingsleys remained publicly dominant, but their private decisions were manipulated, their empire slowly bending under her invisible hand. Anya allowed herself a brief smile. Every misstep, every oversight, every arrogance of the family had become her stepping stone toward triumph. The final phase began with decisive moves, acquiring controlling stakes in the remaining high-value assets of the Kingsleys conglomerate. Using a combination of legal expertise, financial leverage, and strategic timing, she initiated transactions that appeared routine to outsiders, but effectively transferred real power into her hands. Each move was calculated to maintain discretion while maximizing influence. Her network of trusted advisors and intermediaries executed every action with precision, ensuring that Anya remained unseen yet omnipresent. As the dominoes fell, the Kingsleys' internal tension escalated. Executives debated fiercely, shareholders questioned decisions, and the family struggled to maintain a sense of order. Their arrogance, which had once blinded them to any threat, now worked against them. Every reaction, every defensive measure, every attempt to regain control only reinforced Anya's growing power. She observed from a distance, guiding the final steps of her strategy with a mixture of calm calculation and quiet satisfaction. The culmination of her plan arrived subtly yet unmistakably. Through a combination of share acquisition, board influence, and strategic alliances, Anya secured decisive control over the empire's core assets. The final subsidiaries, once considered untouchable, were now aligned under her authority. The Kingsleys, finally grasping the reality of their situation, faced the unthinkable. Their empire was no longer theirs to command. Every lavish office, every luxury property, every high-value asset had shifted under the control of the woman they had humiliated, dismissed, and framed. The psychological impact on the family was profound. They realized too late that every action they had taken against her, every accusation, every insult, every attempt to destroy her reputation had only fueled her rise. The woman they had scorned, labeled powerless, had become the ultimate sovereign of the empire they had built. Their attempts to negotiate, to reclaim control, and to counteract her moves were futile. Anya had anticipated every possible reaction, every potential strategy, and every desperate maneuver. The empire was hers, silently, irrevocably, and flawlessly executed. Anya's triumph was not just a matter of financial or corporate control. It was a testament to the power of patience, intelligence, and relentless strategic planning. She had transformed the narrative of victimhood into one of absolute authority. The Kingsleys' empire, once a symbol of unchecked power and arrogance, now operated under the guidance of the very woman they had attempted to destroy. Her influence reached every corner of the conglomerate, from subsidiaries to key partnerships, ensuring that her vision, values, and strategic decisions shaped the empire's future. The final confirmation came quietly, a series of formal board resolutions, shareholder votes, and legal filings, all executed without fanfare, but fully transferring authority to Anya. She reviewed each document carefully, ensuring that her control was absolute and that the Kingsleys had no legal recourse. The elegance of the takeover was in its invisibility. The family's downfall had been orchestrated with precision, leaving no trace of force or overt confrontation. It was the ultimate demonstration of power, unseen, patient, and inevitable. At night, in the quiet of her office, Anya reflected on the journey. From the humiliation of being framed as a maid to the triumph of controlling an entire luxury empire, the path had required resilience, intelligence, and relentless strategy. She whispered to herself, "They believed they had power. They believed they could destroy me. But true power is patience, vision, and execution. The empire is mine, and every step of the journey was mine to command." The story concluded not with fanfare, but with the quiet satisfaction of absolute victory.
Anya Williams had turned every obstacle, every betrayal, and every act of cruelty into a foundation for her rise. The Kingsleys' empire, once a symbol of unsaleable wealth and influence, now reflected the cunning, strategic, and unrelentless force of the woman they had once sought to destroy. The city remained unaware of the silent transformation, but within the corridors of power, a new reality had emerged. A single, patient, and strategic mind had rewritten the rules of dominance, control, and revenge.